All right, let's get into this big news here for today's episode. We have the Athletic's Italian football writer James Horncastle and also our Spurs and England correspondent Jack Pitt-Brooke. Right, James, I don't think I'm the only one who saw that clip that went viral yesterday, Jose Mourinho leaving Roma in tears. And actually, I don't know about you, but it felt sincere. It didn't feel staged. Do you think he was surprised that it came to this, that he was sacked by Roma?
Oh, undoubtedly. Because, as of sort of late Monday night, him and his staff had planned all the training for the next day. And, they were given no warning that the next day was going to be anything other than an ordinary day. Mm. And they show up at training nice and early, and the owners, the Friedkins, who had not been in Rome, they're Americans, they're from Texas, they'd flown in from Houston overnight, and they were there waiting for him. Mourinho has been wanting a meeting with them for the last few months to discuss a new contract, because his contract is up at the end of the season. And he was told in no uncertain terms that it was over and he was to leave with immediate effect. And he was very upset, very hurt by it, because I don't think he's ever felt as loved as he does at a club as than Roma. And I think he wanted to go out differently. Roma was his sort of redemption until it wasn't. And I think he knows what this kind of looks like. It's Jose Mourinho has been sacked again. And I think he probably felt he deserved a different ending, even though results had deteriorated to such an extent that it's hard to call it a surprise when you look at it objectively. But there's so much of this that makes objectivity very difficult within the context of Rome, where the fans treated him like he was an emperor-like figure, really. That sacking him, he knew was going to be such an unpopular decision that it might stay the hand of the owners, and instead they showed kind of incredible bravery and courage to actually follow through with it.
Yeah, Jack, I mean, as an onlooker, and I know you've got a bit of a Spurs hat on this one, were you shocked when you heard the news that Jose Mourinho was to leave Roma?
No, I wasn't shocked, because it had been clear for a while that performances and results were not really good enough anymore. Obviously, he'll always have that Europa Conference League, and he will always be a legend to Roma fans for that reason. But it's also clear that he can't really get a team performing to a high level in a competitive league week in, week out anymore. And the performances decline over the course of the Mourinho tenure, particularly in the third season. We shouldn't be surprised by this, because it's happened in every job he's done over the last 10 years or so. So it's followed quite a conventional pattern, even though I think the mood has been very different from the mood, for example, at Tottenham or at Manchester United, because of that relationship he'd had with the fan base.
Yeah, I mean, Jack just alluded to it there, first European Cup for Roma in God knows how many years, right? Like, brings the Conference League back, Europa League final. I know they're not doing that well in the league, but surely that should have bought him a bit more time, James.
Well, I think Mourinho has always countered when anyone's criticised Roma's form domestically and in the league, that actually, going on these long European runs has taken it out of the team. They can't work on two or three fronts, and so they've had to pick at the end of the day. And you mentioned Roma's history. They won the Fairs Cup back in the 60s, like a forerunner of the UEFA Cup. They hadn't been in a European final at all to speak of since the early 1990s. And so for him to reach the Conference League final, which the Conference League didn't exist until he got the Roma job, that was its inaugural season. But there are a couple of things here. Jose left Inter in 2010 as a treble winner. He left on that high. No one had ever done the treble before. He's the last manager of an Italian club to win the Champions League. He then goes away goes to Real Madrid, works for Chelsea, works for Man United, works for Tottenham. He then comes back, and no one in the interim in Italy had won any European trophy. And in his first season, wham bam, he does it. And so for Roma fans, that was absolutely huge. People can diminish and belittle it, say it's only a Conference League, as they did with West Ham last year. But to that fan base who hadn't won a trophy, hadn't seen a team win a trophy in 14 years, and so desperate for something to celebrate, it meant the world to them, and it made him an instant immortal for them as well. And so, to go to a European final, win it, having not been in one since the early 90s, and then to go to another European final in your second season. Jose has quite rightly pointed out, it's like, I can't remember any other Roma coach doing that. No one had done it. Can't remember an Italian coach going to back-to-back European finals in a long time either. You probably have to go back to the 90s for that as well. So all of that strengthened his hand against how poor they've been domestically. And you have this weird kind of dystopian paradigm where it's quite old school in that actually players, coaches and clubs should be judged on silverware, not on finishing fourth. In the last 10 years, that's been completely flipped where actually, no, financially, getting into the Champions League and finishing fourth is so much more important than winning a Conference League or getting to Europa League final. I think winning the Conference League brought in 20 million. Yeah. That's like half what you get for playing in a Champions League group stage. And so for Roma's entire project, it was actually more important for them to qualify for the Champions League, which they would have done had they won the Europa League last year. They lost on penalties to Sevilla. And so that's the kind of, I think there's actually quite a lot, that's why there's so much romance tied up in this, because it felt like a kind of football from the 60s and 70s, not only in terms of style, but when fans didn't have to care about financial fair play, which frankly Roma do have to care about, but fans don't care about that. They don't want to hear about the financial results of the team or of the club or that sort of thing. They just want to see their team win something. And Jose kind of understood that. And I think that's why grown men were in tears, sobbing, calling after his car yesterday, Tirana per sempre, we'll always have Tirana, which is where they won the Conference League. So, it's remarkable where you have this kind of split personality of Mourinho's time in Europe, success for Roma. Mourinho's time in Italy, sixth place again. Really, it was seventh, but Juventus got deducted 10 points. And now ninth, their worst season in the league for more than 20 years.
You talked about FFP there, like financial fair play, and I know a lot of Italian teams now, well, the league has lost those tax breaks they allowed. Does that then force the hand of the club a little bit as well, James, in terms of him being the highest earning coach in Serie A?
Serie A over the last 4 years has been able to benefit from this tax break, which was brought in by the Italian government, not explicitly to attract footballers and coaches, but to sort of stop a brain drain of Italians coming to London, going to New York, working in Frankfurt, to bring those back to Italy. But it's also been used to sort of attract top foreign talent. And if you look at the last 4 years, Serie A has had a bit of a resurgence. It's not what it was in the 90s or 2000s, but it's had a resurgence in that last year there were 3 teams in 3 European finals. Inter have been to a Europa League final under Conte, Champions League final under Inzaghi. Different teams going far. Fiorentina Conference League final last year. And they've been able to hire people like Jose on the back of that. Now, this tax break was abolished on January the 1st, so it possibly meant that renewing his contract was going to become even more expensive and more difficult for them to do. Well, I think this brings a wider point, really, Ayo, in that I think whatever you make of Jose's style of football, whether it was boring, not good to watch, whether it's out of touch, Serie A will miss him, and brand Serie A will suffer without him, because we are talking about him on an international podcast today. There aren't many other coaches around the world who lead a show like this, or have people talking about him like this. Jose would guarantee eyeballs. He would bring people to Serie A who are casual fans, or let's say fans of the Premier League, like, oh, what's Jose doing, or what's he done? And I do think he was the one transcendental star that Serie A had. Sure, there are some really fine up-and-coming players, Kvaratskhelia, Osimhen, Leao, and that sort of thing, but they're not household names. You could probably go up to someone in the US and say, name me someone involved in football, and they would probably name Jose Mourinho would be high up there with Messi, Ronaldo, and that sort of thing. So yeah, in some respects, it will be less interesting without him, which is, you have to be honest about that. He's still, in Italy you say intramontabile, which is like unsunsettable. The sun does not set on him. It can't. He's always there.
Yeah, Jack, I'm just thinking, when Jose Mourinho was at Tottenham Hotspur, and James says, it's such a pull for the league in terms of, what he brings in terms of glamour. But, Spurs fans probably don't see it as that in many respects. But, look, if we look at the league table in Serie A, Roma, 5 points away from potential Champions League football or European football and next season. I don't know from how it would have felt through a Spurs lens back then, but surely that's within his remit to get them back up there. 5 points isn't a lot.
No, 5 points isn't a lot, but I think there is just a general trend in the last few years of Mourinho's teams really not delivering the points tallies that you would expect, given it's not like he's had no resources at all in the last 10 years. His Manchester United squad was extremely well put together. And yeah, they got a 181-point season, which is frankly better than United have done since. So, but in the main, when you look at the sort of back end of his career, so Manchester United, Tottenham, and Roma, you can see quite consistent underperformance in the leagues. And the biggest thing he's done at that time is obviously the Conference League with Roma. At Tottenham, he would always point to the fact that he was sacked 4 days before the League Cup final. And maybe if he'd stayed on and won that League Cup final, then his Tottenham reign would look a little bit more like his Roma reign. But the strange thing is that if you look at the first half of Mourinho's career, this was a guy who, as well as delivering, the big knockout competitions, obviously 2004 Champions League with Porto, 2010 Champions League with Inter, he was also incredible in league competition. Chelsea got 95 points in 2004-05. They got 91 points in 2005-06. His Real Madrid team got 100 points in 2011-12. So this was a guy who could deliver you that kind of week in, week out excellence in the league, which gets you those huge points tallies. And he just can't do that anymore. And we can talk about, if it's to do with tactics or methods or fitness or motivation or whatever, but I think he's kind of a cups manager now. I don't think that's unfair to say, but based on what he's done in the last few jobs, like even at Manchester United, it's the Europa League that stands out. It's the League Cup that stands out rather than, really keeping pace with Manchester City in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I'm just looking to his appointment now, James de Rossi, another club legend. Could this be a bit of a PR thing? You've sucked the energy from the fan base by getting rid of someone who was so popular. I guess in the interim, someone like de Rossi, I'm not sure of his experience necessarily, could be the solution for now.
I think people outside of Italy probably do not understand how Jose is probably the most popular Roma coach ever,
right? Even
to the last day. And so sacking him is not a decision that the owners there could take lightly. It's very similar, although not to the same level, but it is similar to what happened under the old owners, who looked at Francesco Totti in his early 40s and said, mate, just retire already. Mm-hmm. And they enforced that on the coach, Luciano Spalletti, retire Totti. And even though Spalletti's Roma played fantastic football, I think Dzeko scored more than 30 or nearly 40 goals that year. They had a club record points total. They finished second. The fans hated Spalletti. And the atmosphere at the ground was terrible. Because they were retiring Totti. And it's the same with Jose, in that Roma fans in some respects were okay with the team being mediocre as long as that coach was that the team was coached by Jose Mourinho. I think it's like this is COD psychology, but I think it's a legacy of like ancient Rome. This is a town where the republic was overthrown, the democracy was overthrown for the strongman, the autocrat, the emperor. Totti was like that. Mourinho's become like that, and Mourinho is very clever at understanding that, and so sacking him is probably the first unpopular decision that this ownership group has made. And so the only way to really keep the fans on side is to bring in one of them, someone that they cannot not get behind. Danielle de Rossi, someone who is a captain of the club, someone who is Roman born and bred from Ostia, the seaside outside of Rome. But my fear for De Rossi is that this is too much too soon for him. He served on Roberto Mancini's staff when Italy won the Euros. He coached Spal in the second division last year, but was sacked after 16 games with 15 points. They're in the relegation zone.
Now you're taking on a big Serie A job to rescue the fortunes of a club in a season.
Big Serie A job, which he can't not say no to. And I think it is quite reminiscent. Okay, Roma aren't going to get relegated like this team I'm going to mention it, but it's quite similar to like Shearer at Newcastle, where De Rossi's dream is to coach Roma. And this could burn him, this experience, this 3 or 4 months, where if the results don't improve, he might never get that dream shot again because it's come too early. So, and that won't play well with the fan base either. If they, after seeing the owners sack Jose, if they see one of them suffer because of the position that they've been put in, it will not play well.
Yeah. Just finally on this, Jack, you talk about that sort of 3-year Jose trend. Is there a sense then that after the Europa League final last year, and we've heard it in the press about Saudi Arabia maybe knocking on the door, and we'll go into this a little later on, potentially Real Madrid or other clubs, he maybe should have called it a day as opposed to where we are right now?
Yeah, maybe in hindsight, but then I think he wouldn't. I mean, James will know about this better than me, but I think he would have been really reluctant to walk out on that relationship. That relationship is so validating for him, as it would be for anyone, to be hero worshipped like that by that fan base in that city. So I don't think he ever would have walked out on it, even if, in hindsight, it's easy to say that clearly the team was in decline.
Do you agree with that, James?
I think it would have depended on the offers that came to him. And I think after reaching back-to-back European finals, he could quite creditably say, I'm back. My stock is not as high as when I won the Champions League with Porto, or won the Champions League with Inter, or when I was with Real Madrid and we were going up against Pep's Barcelona. But I think he'd shown that he wasn't finished, and that he maybe deserved a crack at another blue chip elite job, however you want to call it, back at Real Madrid, at PSG, something like that. And so, that clearly never materialized. And I think the interesting thing with Mourinho is I don't get the impression he's ready to become a coach of a national team.
Interesting.
I think he is so caught up in the day-to-day of coaching. And the way he is wired, I think he needs someone within or without to have a fight with. If you're coaching once every 3 months, what are you going to do? So I don't see his future particularly now, his next job as necessarily being an international job. And likewise, I think Saudi, and a delegation did come to London to hold talks with him over the summer. I think if he were to go to Saudi, it would be an acknowledgement that his time at the very top of the game is over. And so I think he would have to think very carefully about accepting a proposition from Saudi. And so, I mean, I would love to see him back in the Premier League, and everyone thinks the Premier League is now wise to Jose, but I I just think he's such a value added to a league as as conceptualized as a media sport and entertainment product.
Yeah.
I think he's the most fascinating personality that football has produced over the last 20 years, undoubtedly. Regardless of what you think about his tactics and whether he's out of touch, he's the most interesting personality. And yeah, we're still talking about it.
Surely a team like Newcastle feels like a mismatch, even if Jose Mourinho were thinking of coming back to the Premier League.
Look, if I was Newcastle, I wouldn't appoint him. For the reasons that we've talked about, I don't think in the modern game he's someone who you get if you want to maximise your league position. I think really he's someone who you get if you want a figurehead, if you want to get the fans back on side, if you want a bit more attention. I think there are clubs, I can't really think of one off the top of my head, but there are clubs where I think he might fit in better than Newcastle. That all said, it does on some level kind of make a bit of sense. I think a lot of it hinges on how will the people running Newcastle stay patient forever with the current system and the current setup? And I'm sure, obviously George knows 100 times more than I do about this, but speaking just as an outsider, I'd be curious to wonder at what point, or if the Newcastle leadership might get tempted for a bit of a change in direction at some point and think, actually, we've tried it. We tried it one way. Now we want to push on to the next level and maybe try it another way. People in football are transfixed when they go on Jose Mourinho's Wikipedia page and they see what he's won. We've seen this is why he keeps on getting the big jobs, because there is no one else who has. There are managers who've won more than him, but they're not managers who've won more than him with such a great range of clubs or with clubs who are not expected to win. It's not like, his achievements are kind of a different sort from Pep Guardiola's, I think, because of the clubs where he's won the big stuff. And I can't stop this sense in the back of my mind that it's possible that maybe somebody at Newcastle will have to think, you know what, it's worth a go.
Yeah, and I think Jack can speak to this, but there would have been a time when the idea of Mourinho at Tottenham, people said, Daniel Levy's far too sensible for that. That's not something that he would do. And yet he did it. And football has a very strange and beguiling way of making very rational, sensible people do stuff that you would not expect.
Yeah.
And so, as much as George has shut this down, it's Newcastle, it's the club of Bobby Robson, the guy, who gave Jose a break, he was interpreter for at Barcelona. There's all the romance there that you need if you're pitching this to the Saudis, who in another capacity have already spoken to him about maybe taking over one of their teams or their national team. So it doesn't take much for a project to all of a sudden pivot in a different way. Likewise, Chelsea, just.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think Mourinho. The more I think about it, the more I think Mourinho's like the One Ring in Lord of the Rings, which is that even if you know it's bad, and even if you know I'm going to get into trouble with this, you cannot take your eyes off it,
and you want to put it on just one more time.
You're obsessed with the power that you think it might give you.
Yeah.
And this is what Daniel Levy did. This is what the Glazers did. It's what the Roma owners did. And even though there's, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's Newcastle United or the Chelsea owners or, I don't know, Florentino Perez or anyone else in football, and right now they might be thinking, it's not quite worth the trouble, is it? They'll be sitting there on Wikipedia late at night and they'll think, maybe it is worth it. Maybe it is worth. Think of the power that could accrue to us if we just put this ring on our finger one more time. So, and I think the rational side of the argument doesn't hold quite as much power as the kind of irrational side of the argument on this. And I do think that people will that power that Jose has, I think will eventually win out.
Well, if we're talking fantasy, I mean, he did compare himself to Harry Potter last week, right?
Yeah.
You know, the Roma fans are the most incredible I've seen. Their coaches like Jose Harry Potter Mourinho said as he raised his expectations. Look, if we're talking about a fan base, and you've seen how they've sort of galvanised behind the Newcastle manager, Eddie Howe, you know, if he gets Newcastle back into Champions League football, James, waving his wand of magic for, you know, 1 or 2 seasons, you can see that happening, could you?
Yeah, you can. Although I think the reception of Jose in this country, because it's the one he's worked in the most, is perhaps the one that's most jaded by him or has been exposed to him so much they feel like they see through him. Whereas, as I said, in Italy, there'd been like this 10-year vacuum almost of guy leaves, making history, comes back, makes history. And so you know, I do think on the one hand there'd be your savvy Newcastle fans who would say, hang on a minute, we've seen how this has gone for other clubs in this country. And then there are others who'd just be, I think, actually quite... not... It wouldn't be that they couldn't believe it, but I do think this happens a lot with Mourinho. There is a time when fans cannot believe he is coaching their club. And I think that was something, certainly that happened at Roma, where it was just like, I can't believe he's in our dugout. This is unbelievable. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't know what his next move would be after Tottenham, and I was surprised by Roma. So yeah, I find it hard to predict what he will do next.
Yeah, I guess from your perspective, and I say Europe loosely because I also count the United Kingdom as part of this, but what do you think his stock is at this moment in Europe? Last season, of course, with the Europa League final, and obviously previous the Conference League, do we get a sense of what Jose Mourinho's stock is right now?
I mean, you mentioned Budapest, the Europa League final. I think, unfortunately, on an international level, that final is remembered for the reaction of Jose afterwards. Going down to the car park and confronting match officials, the way he spoke, the treatment of Anthony Taylor after the game at the airport, the kind of an environment which he sort of created. That was the international story. Not Roma reaching back-to-back European finals, not Roma being a penalty kick away from reaching the Champions League. And I think that has endured, which I think for his part, he's obviously to blame for that. I think it is a shame because it has overshadowed what was as I said before, his stock should have been as high as it's been in a long time on the back of that. And I think that's why it was important that he didn't get sacked. And yet he has. I think had he got to the end of the season at Roma and they just, they could have framed it as like, let's mutually agree to part ways, it would not have been a sacking. And I think, because it is, people will be sensitive to that. Oh, he's been sacked again. And so I think this, and that's why we were talking about earlier, should he have left there and then? Should he have walked away after Budapest? I think he probably should. Because I think he could have still creditably said, I've taken this team to 2 European finals. Nobody's done that before. And instead, he's available because he's been sacked.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, there's also a growing feeling that Xavi won't be a Barcelona boss at the start of next season. I mean, talk about big headlines. Could Mourinho make a sensational return back to Barca? James, Laporte is known for making some radical decisions. Could Jose be one of them?
I mean, I would love that for all of what Paul has just mentioned. But I mean, the reason I think he became arch enemy was because he was cast away, wasn't he? He thought he would get that job when he was interviewed by Ferran Soriano the guys who are now at Manchester City for Barcelona, and they chose Pep Guardiola instead. So, I know Ferran and Shiki are not there, but they were acting for Laporta at that time. So, it's hard to imagine, but that would just be amazing. Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah,
Make it happen. Socios, please.
Good for a Jack for a guy that loves headlines. Jose Mourinho taking Barcelona back to new pastures. I mean, come on, the script is written, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's really important that Joan Laporta should have the opportunity to correct the historic mistake that he made in 2008. What was he thinking over Guardiola when he had Mourinho? Think how different football would have been if Laporta had only made the right decision and gone for Jose at that point. The funny thing is that Mourinho, I'm not a huge expert on Barcelona, but clearly Xavi obviously was integral to the great Guardiola teams. And if Mourinho were to replace Xavi, he would have to come in and say, look, all this possession, all these rondos, all the stuff defending on the halfway line, pressing to win the ball back, you've got it all wrong, guys. Things are going to change. Things are going to change around here. We've got a different way of doing things now, and I can guarantee you it's much better than all this kind of ticky-tacky nonsense you've been playing for the last 15 years.
And this Argentine from the academy, he's too young to play for me. So send him out on loan, please. Get rid of him.
In fairness, at this moment in time, Barcelona are conceding, and let's not forget that Chelsea team, 15 goals conceded. Still amazing. That's probably what they need right now. A little bit of assurance, a bit of certainty, less flamboyancy. Let's just get pragmatic and just park the bus.
Barcelona are the club that I think, along with Ajax, have the strongest football identity of any club on the planet. That identity comes from Ajax, but it's for someone who is so un-Cruyffian. I think that's why Paul said it would be a capital or cardinal sin. But you could easily make the claim that he is. It feels like Barcelona always appoint someone who has to have worked for Barcelona at some stage, or played, or just interpreted for Barcelona at some stage, and so. As such, Jose would fit that bill.
He could. I'd love to see him showing up at Barcelona and just getting all his favoured lads from the last 10 years of his career into Barcelona. It's time for some experience. We're going to get Chris Smalling in. We're going to get Matic in. We're going to get Højbjerg in. We're going to get Lucas Moura in. We're going to get them all together because these are my warriors. These are the guys who know how to play my football. And all these exciting new players you've got. You guys are going to sit on the bench for a while because we're going to do it differently.
I'd love to see him drag John Terry out of retirement at 40 odd. This is what you need, a bit of steel at the back, boys. Get John in. All right, let's look ahead. Because, James, you did say you don't think he's quite at that point of international football. That day-to-day buzz of league football really suits him. But, at this point in time, you can't rule it out, Jack. And I know with your England hat on... I don't know if I'm reluctant in asking this question. Is this what potentially England need? Someone with a strong identity of what kind of football he really wants to play?
No, not anymore. I think there were points. Clearly, the FA have thought about it in the past. I just don't think it fits really post Southgate. I would absolutely love to see Mourinho at a World Cup. I think he would. I think the kind of the unique atmosphere of a World Cup, the kind of the fact you've got the eyes of the whole human race on the tournament, the high stakes, the fact that it's not 38 game league season, it's just about individual games and specific plans for those games. I think he would be absolutely box office in a World Cup. I think if he would change the tenor of the whole thing if he were there managing whoever. In 2026. I guess another question is, is he now done with club management and so he has to go into international management? I don't really know the answer to that, although I do think that there comes a point when older managers where they need to be open to new ideas, and you saw this with this is how Sir Alex Ferguson stayed relevant in the sort of second half of his time, was new coaching staff, fresh ideas. We've not really seen that with Jose. James will be able to speak about the extent to which he brought in new staff at Roma, but I know that backroom staff was a big issue for him at Tottenham Hotspur. And so, but I wonder if that's kind of his route to staying relevant in the club game if he decides to stay in the
Oh,
club game.
but Jack, can you imagine if he is the England manager, what his staff would be? John Terry, Ashley Cole. I
Frank
mean, like
Lampard.
Frank Lampard again, yep.
I love this. I think 2026 World Cup in the States, his stage. What a stage for Jose to be on.
Joe Cole, Glenn Johnson.
Yeah. Winning the World Cup with England for the first time in 60 years. I
Yeah.
can
It's the biggest prize.
I can kind of see it because I mean, like if you look at like Didier Deschamps' France, right? It's a team that has got glittering talent that should be playing much better football, but tournament football is okay. Let's actually be pretty solid, pretty drab, and give it to Kylian every now and again or that sort of thing. So I can kind of see Jose being, and as Jack said at the top of the show, he's more of a cup manager now. So, part of me would love to see him take on the job of his adopted nation. And yeah, it wouldn't be his last hurrah because I just think he's one of those people who will kind of always work. But yeah, I mean, I'd sign up to that. I'd be on board with that totally.
I mean, Jack, you think about the USA needing that razzle-dazzle, cameras there, press there. The appointment of Jose Mourinho to take over Berhalter, who actually's got quite a mixed bag in terms of how they feel about him, could be a fascinating, and I say fascinating with a small f, for the USA men's national team.
Yeah, and I wonder whether for Mourinho, because I don't think Mourinho will be short of interest. I wonder whether for him, he's going to be attracted to where's the most eyeballs, what would be the biggest achievement. And I mean, winning the World Cup with the USA would be a much bigger achievement than winning the World Cup with England. Simply because England have been really good for the last, throughout the Southgate reign. They've won the World Cup before, obviously, and they have, they've been close to major silverware in the last 2 years. But the idea of taking the USA in their home World Cup in 2026, when the men's team has not got a track record of going very deep into World Cups before, that would be a huge prize for him. And I'm sure to his ego, maybe that would appeal.
I think if he is to get into international management, it's not to be the coach of, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or something like that. I think it's to win.
Yeah.
And so
it's got to be to win.
Yeah, I think he would almost look at a World Cup as like being one and done. I'm going to do my Mourinho World Cup and I'm going to win it. And so I think because of that, he would look to take the job that guarantees him the most talent. And you could say, would that be Portugal? Would that be England? I think both of those would stand above the US, even with some of the good young players that the US have got. So yeah, I don't see it. I mean, I could see him sort of winning the World Cup with England in the US and then taking an MLS job on the back of that in LA or something.
I'm just thinking lifestyle at this point, He's lived in some great countries. He's had a great life. I mean, now, just kick up a Sunset Boulevard with a little cocktail in your hand, pop into work every few months, and then, it's not a bad life, sunset and sea.
Yeah, I just think he's, in some respects, he is made for the US. He completely gets what they want from a sports media and entertainment personality. But I still think, even though it's the 20th anniversary of him winning the Champions League with Porto and sort of quote unquote bursting onto the scene, I just don't think he's done yet. I think he's still looking for jobs of prestige, still looking jobs that are of relevance. And so for those reasons, I just think he will still look for a project that gives him a chance of winning something.
I'm going to put you both on the spot, and that brings me nicely to my next question here, James. Decision time. We've thrown a few curveballs in here with league teams, with international teams. You talk about prestige, you think about projects. If you were Jose Mourinho right now, and you'd probably take a bit of time off, to be fair, just to reassess the situation, what is the most likely option for you if there were a team to call? What seems most feasible to take your ego into?
I don't know. I mean, I come back to Chelsea just because Chelsea just like they hire and fire under this ownership group. I think they've got some the owners there are. I think he would appeal to them. As much as they have built an analytics department and all this sort of thing that makes them look smart, they've acted in ways which, we go back to kind of being irrational, and so I think even like Judas is number one. Remember that when Conte's Chelsea beat his Man United. Like I still see Chelsea as being a home for him. So the prospect of a third act in a city which has become his home. This country, England, has become his home over the years. I think would be something. I mean, I can't say. I was going to say something I wouldn't rule out, but I just think it would be enticing, and I just find Chelsea so unpredictable at the moment that that in itself just gives it a slight possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to be unoriginal and say Chelsea.
No, come on.
I just think that the idea of, I mean, it's such an irresistible. It's a big lever that they can pull. The bring back Jose lever, and I don't know if. I think that the chances of at least one of Todd Bowley and Behrad Eghbali wanting to pull it at some point in the next year or two are actually really high. The team's not doing great at the moment. They want to get the fans are antsy, and you're already seeing on social media some Chelsea fans wanting to get him back in. I know they tried the kind of club legend for a short period of time last year with Frank Lampard, and it didn't work at all. But I just think, and what he offers you as well is, if you're having, it doesn't really. If you're having problems with your dressing room and you want a manager who can come in and sort out the dressing room and separate the good lads from the bad lads, and that's what he offers you. And I think a lot of the more frustration that Chelsea will have with their kind of slightly disaffected group of players who are not pulling in the same direction, the more attractive the idea comes of the strong man who can come in and sort them all out.
Yeah, as we're closing the pod, and he's still very much with us. I feel this is like, talk to us about your favourite Jose moment. But I mean, there are so many from the quips to the running down the field. As a Chelsea manager. Jack, I'll start with you on this one. Probably not many Spurs memories, but like your favourite Jose memory in Europe, in the UK. Let us know.
Well, Judas is still number one, was brilliant. What else is there? Running to the sprinklers.
Yeah, that's one.
I Am the Special One, which is obviously a very long time ago now. I just think there's something. I think Mourinho is a legend, and I don't want to sound like I'm kind of down on him, but there is something compelling about when his teams are struggling and they get in this sort of doom spiral, and he starts lashing out at the players. And as a journalist, all you're thinking is, which players are he going to pick this time? Do you remember when he was on his way to getting sacked by Chelsea in 2015-16, which I genuinely think that half season 2015-16 is one of the most spectacular stories in Premier League history, because he just won the league. People still thought he was the best manager in the game, and then it all unraveled by Christmas. And I don't think we've ever quite seen a collapse from top to bottom like it in that way. So for me, that's still and it was also the first time we got any sense that the Mourinho wasn't quite what he used to be. Like, this was not a normal thing to happen. Like, this shouldn't be happening to a great team. And this, of course, is what led to Antonio Conte calling it, quote, the Mourinho season, when he took over at Chelsea the next year, which I think is still Antonio Conte's greatest contribution to English language.
But this is the thing,
even ahead of his rant in the Southampton press room last March, which ended his time at Tottenham. I'm going to say 15-16.
Yeah. I think Jose even brings the best out of his opponents. Yeah. So Jack talks about Conte there, but like Pep, when it was Real Madrid Barcelona, said like el puta jefe, wasn't it? It's like, this guy is the effing boss. and he's controlling everything, setting the narrative and that sort of thing. I'll never forget the press conference he gave when he was a Man United coach. I mean, there were again so many moments at Man United that respect. But when Frank de Boer had sort of questioned his use of Marcus Rashford and said that, and he just went through Frank de Boer's record at Crystal Palace, saying, if he worked under Frank de Boer, he would just learn how to lose, and then just went through that. It's so good. It's so good. But yeah, I mean, even at Roma, I mean, he's had some great moments, even like recently, where he was again sort of criticizing referees or the referee choice for one of his games, and he claimed afterwards to be misinterpreted. So without warning, just did his entire post-match interviews in Portuguese just to Italian broadcasters to say, like, my Italian's clearly not polished enough, so I'm just going to do this in Portuguese. Just, yeah, I mean, in all of 20 years of like Jose being mainstream, you would have thought like he would just have these tics, that we've all seen and heard before, and yet he's very original and inventive in that still in his communications approach. So
yeah, I mean, from an Arsenal fan, that specialist in failure line against Arsene Wenger, but not for me, but yeah, it was a great line, simply, and I use this in context because he knows how to play the media. I mean, if there's someone with that emotional intelligence, right, that just knows that if I drop this line, it's gonna go viral. Yeah. It's him. He's so self-aware.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say it's almost quite Trumpian in just like, Sleepy Joe or Crooked Hillary and stuff like that. But no, he's still a master of the press conference, and I think more than any other coach, he understood that the game kicks off not at 3:00 on a Saturday, it kicks off at 12:00 on Friday in the press conference. He's still very good at that. Whatever you think about, sort of results and that sort of thing. So just brilliant. Just I don't know.
Do you know, I'm so interested to see where he ends up next. It's probably a really good time to call it a day for the pod, though. But gents, I really appreciate your time, James, Jack as well, and Jack, any Mourinho chat on View from the Lane this week, and also just for our listeners, when's the next one out?
There was a little bit we just talked about his departure from Roma and how we look back on his time at Tottenham, and I think the next episode's going to be out today, Wednesday afternoon.
Oh, nice one. Make sure you take a listen to that. And also, James, you met Christian Pulisic for an exclusive interview. I'm still yet to catch it. I've seen some nice clips. Thank you for that.
Pleasure. Yeah, nice to go to Milan. Got to sample the extremely good canteen at Milanello. So yeah, if it was only for that, it was worth going.
I love that. All right, thanks so much once again, gents. Please remember to rate and review the podcast if you're enjoying it. You can also subscribe to The Athletic for just $2 or £2 a month for 12 months. Head over to theathletic.com/football pod. Right now, you can also read James's interview with Christian Pulisic as well as his piece on Mourinho as well. Thank you so much for listening. We're back tomorrow.